Good afternoon, everyone. This is John Ives with the National Weather Service in Kansas City. I am the Central Region Climate Services Program Manager, and I would like to welcome you to this afternoon's Midwest and High Plains Climate and Drought Outlook across the central United States. And our presenter today will be Dr. Jim Angel. He is the state climatologist with the Illinois State Water Survey at the University of Illinois. If everyone please could keep their phones muted, it's *6 to mute. That would be much appreciated to keep the background noise down. Without any further ado, Jim, it's all yours.
Thanks, John. Hello, everybody. This is the May 15th Central Region Climate Outlook webinar. We've been doing these for some time here, and so there's my contact information, and we've had a little bit of rain here in Illinois and lots of just some kind of low-level flooding. There's somebody's backyard who will turn their playground into a swimming pool there. But so in case you're not familiar, we've been doing these for quite some time, and it's really a collaboration amongst several partners across the central region, including the state climatologists, the regional climate centers, National Drought Mitigation Center, and the various National Weather Service offices, as well as a host of other folks that join in from time to time and help out as well. Our next climate and/or drought outlook will be on June 19th with Brian Fuchs navigating that one, and then the next one will be on July 17th. These are always timed to be on a Thursday when the new CPC outlooks come out. And you can access all this information that both the High Plains and Midwestern Regional Climate Centers keep copies of these presentations and the slides, so you can actually go back and review what we've talked about today. And we're not giving away any state secrets, so you can certainly go back and dip into those files and look at those slides some more. And there will be time for questions today as well at the very end of the presentation. So what we'll do, we'll talk a little bit about what's happening around the Midwest right now, in the central region right now, and then look at some of the impacts and issues that we're kind of worried about, or maybe of some concern in the future. And then we'll also look at the outlooks as put out by the National Weather Service. And here's a picture I found of a 36-row planter. I had to count the rows they can plant at one time. So it just gives you an idea how fast these folks can move when planting corn, soybeans, and they use different equipment for wheat. But we talk about planting progress here in a little bit, and this is what it looks like now opposed to a couple of generations ago where it might have only been a 2 or 4 row planter. So planting can take place pretty rapidly around the Midwest with the newer equipment, and it's kind of mind-boggling. I'm not sure how this guy gets turned around at the end of the field. So we'll look at some maps of temperature and precipitation and their departures, kind of give you a sense of where we've been since the last webinar. This is the 30-day temperature departure from average, and for the last 30 days. So it's color-coded, so the warmer colors mean it's above average on temperatures, and the cooler colors, the greens and the blues, indicate cooler than average temperatures. And you can see here that we've got a small band of slightly warmer than average temperatures going across Kansas, Missouri, the southern half of Illinois, and then on into Indiana and Ohio and Kentucky. But for the most part, most of the central region has actually been running on the cool side over the last 30 days, and remarkably cold the farther north you go. So you get up into the Dakotas and Minnesota and Wisconsin, you're looking at areas that are 6 to 8 degrees or more colder than on average for this time of year. So that's bringing up some interesting challenges, and we'll talk more about that as we move forward. But I will just say at this point that coming off a cold winter like this, we've got some areas in the Dakotas and I've heard reports in Michigan as well that they've still got some frost in the ground. So we haven't even gotten the soils thawed out in some places. So that's going to be a real impediment to agriculture, at least for a while. It gets warmer, obviously, the farther south you go, and we'll look at soil temperatures here in a minute. So big story here is the very cold temperatures in those northern tier states at this point in time. Look at the 30-day precipitation. You know, the kind of historical climatology of the central region is it's very dry in the west, and then you get wetter as you move eastward. And that's certainly the case in the last 30 days with not much falling out in the plain states. Many places out there we're seeing an inch or less, those reddish colors there. As you get towards the Midwest and the eastern half of the Corn Belt, then you see a lot of greens and blues, so that means we're getting 4 to 6 to 8 inches of precipitation. So we've got a very dry area out west. We've got, by contrast, a fairly wet area in the north-central part of the central region there, kind of centered over Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa at this point in time, so much above average precipitation in that period here. So this is the actual precipitation. This is the same time period, but we're looking at departures from average. So the areas in blue are well above average. In many cases have gotten more than twice their average precipitation for the last 30 days in that north-central region. Areas in green are pretty good. They're a little on the wet side, so that extends all the way up to the Dakotas and westward there and parts of Iowa and Illinois and places elsewhere. The dry spot has been Nebraska and Kansas and Missouri and a few spots in Illinois and Indiana. So it's not uniformly wet. We've had generally wetter conditions in the northern half of the central region and drier conditions in the southern half at the 30-day time frame. Now, if we step back and look at the 90-day precipitation departures, again, same color scheme here with the warmer colors indicating drier conditions. Now you're starting to see that the persistent dryness out in the Kansas, Nebraska area and spilling over into Missouri, and that area is in many places down 4 to 6 and even 8 inches in those very dark red areas there. So some pretty significant precipitation deficits have started to pile up in the last 30 days. So that's been kind of our problem area in terms of dryness, and we'll see more of that as we look at the drought monitor. So that's some real concerns there about what the impacts are of that, especially on the wheat crop. If we look at the last 12 months, you also see that there's kind of a dry area that's kind of shifted a little bit eastward there. It's really kind of a leftover from last summer. As you may recall, we had a very wet spring over much of the Midwest and the central U.S., and then that was followed by some pretty dry conditions, especially in parts of the Corn Belt. And there's some areas that just haven't fully recovered from that. So there's some areas that are now down 5 to 10 or maybe even up to 15 inches below average for the last 12 months. That's not necessarily a problem right now, but what it may be a problem with is future stream flow levels and maybe lake levels and shallow groundwater levels. Because if you're that short over that long a period, that area is kind of at the hydrologic risk of drought at this point, at some of those areas that are in the oranges and reds there. So that's something we're kind of looking at this point. It's not really an issue now where it's raining in much of Missouri, Iowa, and Illinois right now, so that's not going to be much of a problem in the short term, but it could be a problem later on as we get into the growing season and when the demand on water is much greater. We did have snow. I was enjoying some photos from Nebraska, where in the eastern part of the region they were in the 70s and 80s, and it was snowing in western Nebraska. So we've got some snow in Colorado and Wyoming and Nebraska, and then we got another shot up in the Minnesota, Wisconsin area. So we're still getting some snow out there. The winter season isn't over in some places yet, and we saw a little bit even as far south as Kentucky and Indiana. So we've got kind of things winding down on the snowfall side, but we did get a little bit of that in the last 30 days. Now we'll move over to rivers and lakes, and this is the 28-day average stream flow from the USGS gauges. This is their national map, and what you can see here Kind of the theme like we saw on those other maps is the warmer colors mean drier conditions or lower stream flow levels. So you can see there's a large swath up through Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas of much below average, or in some cases near record low stream flow levels. So that's, this long-term drought conditions really put the pressure on the hydrologic cycle there. You can see a scattering of dry conditions through Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana as well. It's kind of off and on there. That's probably what we're seeing from that 12-month dry period there in those areas. So it's not anything catastrophic or at this point in Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana, but it is something to be concerned about. And you see a little bit of that up in Iowa as well. But the other side of the coin is that we're seeing a lot of very good stream flows, across the much of the Corn Belt and the northern states there and the Dakotas and all the way over to Colorado. There's many, many areas that have pretty good stream flow, at least near the median, which is about in the green zone there, and some of them are actually in the upper quartile or the top 75 percentile of what's going on in terms of stream flow for this time of year. So stream flow-wise, probably no surprise, the worst part is in Kansas, and then it's not too bad in many other places as well. If you look at kind of go basin by basin, if you look at the Missouri Basin, there are some areas that have a minor chance of flooding, and part of it's just with this overall wet conditions that we've seen in the Dakotas and elsewhere over the last 30 to 90 days. So there are some sub-basins there that are at least at somewhat of a risk, and you can kind of look through the list there. But most of the wording there is minor flooding at this point, so there's nothing ominous coming down the pike at this level. At this time, I should say. And then there's just some notes there that while there is above average mountain snowpack and the snowmelt has begun, it's because of the cool weather, it's been going rather slowly. And of course, we're struggling with wet soils and very cold temperatures up there. So the flooding, there's some minor flooding expected, but not anything really widespread at this point in time. So they're kind of watching some of especially the Dakotas, just because things have been so wet up there that if they did get a fairly significant rainfall event, they might see some localized flooding at this stage. But there's nothing ominous as far as the whole Missouri River Basin system at this point. If we look at the significant outlook for the upper Mississippi, probably the main areas that are getting some concern right now is that the main tributary of the Mississippi is starting to get pretty high from about up there in the Iowa-Minnesota border all the way down to about Hannibal, Missouri. There's some pretty good flooding going on, moderate flooding at this point. Due to all the rain that they've had up in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa. So all that's working its way through the system and now causing the possibility of flooding, especially along that stretch there from Dubuque to Quincy, I guess, and down a little farther than that. So that's the main concern right now. Most of the rest of the river basin is looking pretty good. If we look over at the Great Lakes, probably the big story there has just been that it's after the cold winter where we had record ice cover. We've had a slow start to the shipping season. There's the first ships to go through the Soo Lock, Sault Ste. Marie. It's about a month ago, and that's a little slow, and it's been slow going ever since then. I think I read reports that they've been having shipping trouble, and early on they were some of the steel works down around Cleveland were running out of iron ore, so they were that's usually shipped out of Superior. So it's kind of slowed things down. This is the latest look at the ice cover. Most of the Great Lakes are ice-free except for Superior. Obviously, it's the most northern and the deepest, so it tends to be the coldest anyway. But this year, it's really hanging in there as far as the ice cover goes on the Great Lakes. So like I said, that's kind of slowed down commerce in some respects. But it's probably the upside has been that because of all this ice cover that we had this winter, and now into spring, and with and overall very cold temperatures, the evaporation rates off the lakes this winter have not been nearly as high as they were in years past. The last couple of years we had some mild winters with a lot of open water throughout the winter season, so we lost a lot of evaporation right off the lake, so that had an impact on lake levels. If you look right now, Lake Superior is actually looking pretty good. This is from the Corps of Engineers. The red line is the observed lake levels, and they've you can see back in 2013 they were pretty low, below the long-term average, which is that blue line there, kind of the reference point. And you can see that in the fall there it started to catch up and has pretty much gotten back to the long-term average at the end of 2014 and now on into this middle part of 2014. We had, like I said, not only the reduced evaporation in wintertime, but we had a lot of snow this winter, and this spring we had a lot of rain in that Minnesota, Wisconsin area, so all that made its way into Lake Superior. So it's made quite a recovery from fairly low levels about 2 years ago. Lake Michigan and Huron, they were also fairly low about 2 years ago and started to recover some this fall and winter and now into spring there. It's still below the long-term average, but at least it's getting away from the record low levels that we're flirting with about a year ago. So again, it's the reduced evaporation in the wintertime and the fairly wet spring and snow this winter that's kind of helped them out there. So, and the rest of the lakes were always in pretty good shape. These are the two uppermost lakes, so they were the ones that were problematic early on. So now that Superior's kind of filled up, I think there's a better chance of Michigan making further recovery. If we move on into agriculture, there's a couple of things to look at here. One, this is the soil moisture anomaly. This is based on a number of runs of a soil moisture model. And we don't have a lot of really great soil moisture measurements out there, so we have to rely on models to kind of give us a sense of where things are sitting right now. So this is one that is actually run a couple of days ago, but it showed that widespread dry area that extends from Texas all the way up to Kansas and parts of Nebraska, and really it kind of shows up in Missouri and Illinois and Iowa as well. Now, we have some evidence to kind of confirm some of the dryness we're seeing in Missouri, Iowa, and Illinois in the sense that some of the deeper layers of the soil are looking on the dry side. But the other part of this story is the wet conditions we see farther to the west there. So, Montana, the Dakotas, and Wyoming are looking much better than they've looked for the last couple of years and for this time of year. So they're actually above average on soil moisture in that region, while the rest is a little bit below average. And then we've got, farther into the eastern part of the Corn Belt, we're, for all practical purposes, pretty close to the long-term average there. Probably one of the big stories that we may have been hearing about and will continue to hear about is the winter wheat condition across the U.S. And this kind of a spaghetti plot here of the last several years of kind of the overall wheat condition. And what they do is the USDA has the categories of conditions from excellent to very poor, and you kind of have a weighted scale of that, so you kind of get one number that tells you at least the general sense what everything looks like. And so you see that red line with the arrow here, that's for this year. So we're down there in the weeds with several other years that were not so great. So we had kind of a predominance of poor to very poor conditions, really pulling down that overall index number there. So we're down there with there's some other years that are also pretty low as well, but it just does not look good for the wheat crop at this point. This is a map showing the winter wheat conditions across the U.S. And again, it's that percent poor to very poor category that's really the outstanding one there. So you can see that, for example, Kansas is at 56% of the crop is at poor to very poor conditions. And you can see it up and down there. Probably Kansas, Nebraska, and Colorado, and especially Oklahoma and Texas are probably the hardest hit area. So the wheat farmers had a pretty tough time. They had a dry fall, so that kind of hampered the emergence of what was planted. Then we had a very cold winter, so we had a lot of winter kill in various areas. I know that was a big problem here in Illinois. And then we've had this cold spring in some parts of the country, but also, and especially Kansas, we had hot, dry conditions, which has kind of finished things off. So we've had a pretty tough time with the wheat crop, especially in the western half of the central region there. Right now, the USDA expects the U.S. wheat production in general to be down about 8% from last year, but some of the states will be harder hit, including Kansas, which will be down about 18% from last year. So the numbers kind of tell the story there. Look at kind of a related issue, and that's pasture and rangeland. Again, looking at poor to very poor conditions, you can really see that Kansas and Nebraska and Colorado really stand out in the central region. Of course, it's hard to ignore what's going on in Oklahoma and Texas there. But so it's a lot of very poor conditions out west there, but you go eastward and northward, and it's not quite so bad. Probably some of the high numbers you see up in Michigan and Wisconsin are the fact that it's been so cold and wet this spring. I think there's been some slow development of pasture land in those areas. I know we had some similar problems in Illinois. So it's just the cold spring. It's just not very conducive to getting that grass growing. Overall corn planting progress, the numbers at first glance look pretty good. We're at 59% planted versus 58%. Thanks to the 36-furrow planters, we can do that pretty quickly. The emergence is a little bit behind, though. It's 18% this year versus the 25% for the 5-year average. But the real story is there's a couple of states in the northern tier that are way behind at this point in time. We got like North Dakota, it's at 3% instead of the average of 33%. Minnesota is about half of where they should be, as are Wisconsin and Michigan. So while it's going well in some places, these 4 states are facing some issues. So I've heard stories of big concerns now of should they switch to a shorter variety of corn? In some cases, switching over to soybeans, which are a little less sensitive to being planted late. But I think that's going to be a continuing issue, especially in these northern states, of getting such a late start. And as we'll see in a minute, the forecast for the summer is not going to help them out much either. This is just to kind of zoom in on Illinois, since it's my favorite state. Then if you look at the corn planted, this is a graph of the black line there is the 5-year average. The blue line is what happened last year. So a lot of delays. This is typical in many parts of the Midwest, a lot of delays because of the wet weather. This year we got off to a terribly slow start, just like last year, but then we quickly caught up, and now we're kind of raced ahead of the long-term average. But even so, even though we've got the percent of corn planted looking pretty good, the amount that's emerged and where it's at and where it should be for this time of year is behind the curve. So I think that's going to be a story that's going to be an issue pretty much around the Corn Belt this year. All right, so we've got subsoil moisture. I kind of hinted at this earlier in Iowa, Illinois, and Missouri. You've been the surface moisture is fine. The subsoil moisture is looking a little ratty in places. That's not an issue right now, but if we get into June and July and it gets a little on the dry side, there won't be that deep subsoil moisture to tap into. So we might see some issues crop up pretty quick this summer. I won't say too much more about that. Soil temperatures, in the southern part of the central region, they're looking pretty good. They're in the 60s and for the most part in this part of the region. But you get up in here, we've still got some soil temperatures, 4 inches, still in the 40-degree range up in the Dakotas, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. And in fact, if I didn't mention this earlier, still have some areas reporting frost in the ground. So pretty remarkable for this time of year. This is the U.S. Drought Monitor. It just came out this morning. You can see the very angry red colors in Texas, Oklahoma, and parts of Kansas there. That's kind of the heart of the the central area, central U.S. Drought right now. It's been ongoing in many places for several years now. So it's just a pretty tough area, pretty grim circumstances out there. And as far as our region here in the central U.S., we've got concerns in Kansas and Colorado and Nebraska, and kind of spilling over to some of the rest of the bordering states. But for the most part, we've got some pretty good drought-free areas up in the northern states and in the eastern states of the region. So percentage-wise, we look fairly good out once you get outside that Kansas dry area there. So eastern Corn Belt and kind of the northern part of the Corn Belt, that drought has not been the issue just yet. This is the change from last week. It just kind of shows you that for the most part, these areas in the light gray here are no change at all. So there's a little bit of improvement to these kind of greenish shaded areas, and in parts of Iowa and Nebraska got some rains that kind of helped out. So that's kind of been some areas that have improved in the last week anyway. A little bit of a worsening along the Kansas-Oklahoma border there, and as well as that southeast corner of Colorado. If you look just kind of zoom in on the central region, although this doesn't get all of our central region states here, but you can see that for the most part, right now, there's the percentage-wise, there's about 11% of the areas in some stage of drought D1 to D4, and it's and like I said, it's pretty much concentrated in that Kansas area, pretty clear in most of the rest of the states at this point in time. Then we'll kind of shift gears here and talk a little bit about the outlook as we march through the season here. And probably the one thing that's going to be a story, if you haven't heard about it already, is El Nino this year. This is a graphic of La Nina and El Nino. So La Nina is when we have really cold temperatures along the equator, especially in the eastern half of the Pacific there. And here's the warmer than average temperatures of an El Nino. So they're kind of night and day as far as the temperature pattern in the Pacific Ocean. And of course, that would becomes a big deal for us because it not only changes the ocean temperature patterns, but it also will change the atmospheric patterns across the Pacific Ocean basin, which then affects our weather patterns over the United States. So we had big ones in 1982-83 and 1997-98. So those were some really outstanding ones where this pool of water was very, very warm, and you can see it here in this December 1997 event. Extraordinary warm temperatures there. The forecast is for El Nino to pretty much arrive by sometime this summer. I think here's a plot of the odds of it showing up. So the red bar here is the one you want to watch. So that is marching upward of May, June, July time frame. It's up to about 58%, and it really continues on, the odds of that happening all the way out through the end of the year. So it's pretty good odds that we're going to have this occur. It's not an exact science for forecasting El Nino. Sometimes nature can throw you a curveball, but at least at this point in time, the odds are pretty good that we're going to see one. Not quite sure what the strength is at this point. There's some indication it could be an early peaking El Nino event, so we'll see how that plays out. But it's certainly the odds of it showing up are looking more and more likely as far as sometime this summer and continuing on into the fall. If you look at the conditions with that, it's for us in the Midwest and the central part of the U.S., we're a little bit insulated from some of the harsher effects. El Nino kind of gets some bad PR from what it does to places like Australia, which throws it in pretty much widespread drought. But here in the central U.S., it's actually a little more moderate as far as its impacts on us. And it kind of remains to be seen if it's going to be good news or bad news, but it actually has the potential to bring cooler and wetter conditions. And the CPC forecasts do incorporate the effects of El Nino in their forecasts, so we'll see that as we step forward here. So this is just the hazards for the next couple of days. So we're below average temperatures over the next in that in the next couple of days here as we get through the middle part of May. Some heavy rains expected in parts of the upper part of Minnesota and out in the Wyoming area. And probably the biggest deal right now in the short term is hot temperatures out here right over the drought region. And so it's just going to be problematic in that area. But I think probably this area is going to be fairly cold. And then we're also going to have continued flooding on the Mississippi main stem of the river there between Dubuque and Quincy. Precipitation-wise, a lot of the precipitation is falling on the East Coast. We'll get some doses here in the Midwest or the central U.S. In the Midwest and then in parts of the High Plains there. But there's some areas that are going to be fairly dry over the next 7 days, and unfortunately one of the areas not going to get too much is the area that needs it most, so that's going to be a problem as we move forward. This is the 6 to 10 day outlook. On the left-hand side is the temperatures. So you got this large area of above average temperatures expected over that May 20th to May 24th time period right in through here. And then you go farther west and you've got an increased chance of below average temperatures out in the Dakotas and westward. Precipitation-wise, we got a large area of pretty much all the central region is covered with an increased chance of above average precipitation during that time period. Stepping forward to the 8 to 14 day forecast on the temperature side. Sorry about that. On the temperature side, above average temperatures remain in parts of the central region, especially in that southeast corner there, Missouri, Illinois, and Iowa, or Illinois and Indiana and Kentucky in that part. Then this large stretch of below average temperatures are expected out in the plain states. So it's kind of a little bit of shifting of that pattern we saw at the 6 to 10 day, and a continuation of the above average or increased chance of above average precipitation pretty much across the entire region. So maybe this will be welcome news for Kansas and Nebraska and Colorado at this point. Maybe not so much for the rest of us. Here's the June outlook. Large band of increased chance of below average temperatures running from Montana all the way through the Great Lakes and extending down into the Appalachians there. That's kind of pretty much of a continuation of the pattern we've seen so far of below average temperatures, and kind of what you would kind of expect is as El Nino starts to kick in, and then we've got down here, we've got an increased chance of above average temperatures, which is pretty tightly correlated with the drought that we're seeing in that area. If you look at precipitation-wise, we've got this large streak of increased chance of above average precipitation from the Rockies all the way through the central U.S. and the southeastern part of the United States, an increased chance of below average precipitation around the Great Lakes region there. So again, this may be kind of welcome news, at least if you're in Kansas, Nebraska, and parts of Colorado at this point in time. So June could be some help on the way there as far as the drought conditions go. If you look at the June, July, and August time frame, so the 3-month forecast there for the whole summer, that area of below average temperatures just sticks around across the upper Midwest there, so it persists. Then we've got warmer than average temperatures more likely in the drought area. Precipitation-wise, we've got a large area of increased chance of above average precipitation from the Rockies out into the High Plains area. So that's, again, that maybe provides some relief from the current drought situation out there. And probably it's good news for this part of the Corn Belt anyway to not be in above average precipitation. I think we've gotten plenty of precipitation for the moment. We just need some warmer temperatures at this stage. Here's the outlook for fall, September, October, November. For the most part, the central region, it's equal chances of above, below, or near average temperatures and precipitation. The only interesting pattern is there's some expected increased probability of being above average temperatures that kind of extends out from the west coast on into the interior there. So we're kind of, especially in that summertime pattern, you can see a little bit of the El Nino pattern starting to show up. There is least a tendency in some cases for El Nino to bring cooler than average temperatures, especially across the upper part of the Midwest there. So I think that's, they're starting to incorporate that in their forecast. Although, the thing about El Nino to remember is that each one kind of has its own personality, so the effects can vary from one to the next. So it's not always clear-cut how it will play out. Here's the seasonal drought outlook. So that looks like the darker brown area here in Oklahoma and parts of Kansas. They're expected to the drought to persist, but maybe the good news is they are expecting some improvements in this area in the northern part of Kansas, and on in Nebraska and Colorado. And again, that's kind of reflected from what we saw in the outlook both for June and for the summer as a whole, of an increased chance of above average precipitation in those areas. So that might provide some relief, or at least that's what they're expecting at this point. We look at kind of a summarize here. So in general, as far as the current conditions go, we've got cooler than average conditions pretty much prevailing over most of the central region, and it's probably the most severe in that northernmost states, especially the Dakotas and Minnesota and Wisconsin and Michigan. In general, it's been wetter than average conditions across the north central states in our central region here. And then we've got various stages of drought in kind of more of the western part of the central region over in Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, and Iowa. But the rest of the region is pretty much drought-free at this point, including the eastern corn belt. The winter wheat crop is a concern. They've had a rough growing season, and in some places it's probably going to continue to be rough as we move forward until we get that harvested there. Late start to the planting of corn and soybeans, and that could be a concern. If it were to warm up this summer, we could get back on track, but some of those northern areas with the increased chance of below average temperatures, that's going to be really tough to catch up from this late start. As far as El Nino goes, the chance of it exceeds 65% by this summer, according to the Climate Prediction Center. June, in general, increased odds of cooler conditions in the northern states and wetter conditions throughout much of the central region, and an increased chance of cooler temperatures this summer in the north and wetter conditions in the west. So that pretty much wraps things up. Here's some further information on our partners. So we've got the climate centers, here's where you can find the recordings of what we talk about today, and here's the National Climatic Data Center, and they put out monthly climate reports that would be good to check out, and here's the Climate Prediction Center URL. So we've got that and several other important URLs here that you can tap into to cover pretty much everything that we talked about today. And on the last slide, we've got, this is just some of the people participating, and now we have a few minutes for questions, so I'll turn it back over to John.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. That was a great briefing today, and very interesting how things are developing coming out of this winter. If you have any questions for Jim, if you muted your line earlier with *6, what you have to do now is hit the pound and then 6, and that will unmute your line. So go ahead. Whoever has a question, please speak up at this point.
This is Nancy. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Yes.
Could you just run through again? I'm used to seeing equal chances in Nebraska for about any kind of weather, and it looks like there is, as you said, a strong signal for precipitation May into June and later. What, again, is the reason that gives us optimism that we'll have a wetter than average late spring and summer? Thank you.
Okay, so I pulled back up the June, July, and August temperature and precipitation pattern. There's some indications from, at least historically, from the past El Nino events that there is a tendency for them to be on the wet side in that part of the central U.S. Yeah, you're right. It's kind of unusual. I'm used to seeing EC across the central U.S. all through summer, both temperature and precipitation. So this is actually unusual to see both this temperature pattern across the northern states there in that wetter pattern to the west. But I think what they're seeing is the beginnings of the influence of the El Nino.
And Nancy, let me add to that too. This is Doug Cluck. So what I think when this forecast was made, they were also seeing a stronger monsoon flow from the south and southwest, and this results in sort of those slightly higher probabilities over the Rockies and some of the southwest and west. It's not that strong of a probability is my first caveat.
Okay.
And if they had a 50% or something like that in the middle, I'd take big notice. I mean, it's worth noticing. You're right. It's rare, but I wouldn't go overboard. And remember, that's a 3-month period, and you could get one big rainstorm in August and be fairly dry in June and July, and that could turn out to be right.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, because they don't get that much rain that time of the year anyway. So, it's not. It can happen in odd ways in those areas where it tend to be sort of dryish in that time of the year.
Okay. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Jim.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Hello, this is Diane Manklager.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Hi, Diane.
Hey, I was wondering, is there any probability of the wind decreasing?
Jim, go ahead and answer that.
Yeah, that's right. If you're in Nebraska, the wind never goes. It's always windy in Nebraska, right?
Well, I mean, up in the Dakotas it is, but it just seems to be higher than normal.
There are some, this whole winter was pretty windy, to be honest. And I noticed, and I can't remember where I found that information, but I think it's on the National Climatic Data Center site. There is some maps out there that show how the winds have been in terms of speed compared to normal, and we were way above in the wintertime. I haven't looked at those recently, so I don't know what to tell you. That's something we don't normally forecast any further than about 7 days out.
Okay.
So,
just wondering.
yeah.
This is Dennis Toddy. How long have you lived in South Dakota? You have to remember that we're always windy up here.
Yeah, always windy, but according to my flag, we were a little windier this year.
that did come up. We haven't run numbers yet, but I think they'd run some numbers in Sioux Falls, say, for April, and I think April would come in higher on the list for windier months also. Doug's right. Looking ahead, it's really hard to say. We've had lots of low-pressure systems, synoptic activity going through, and that's going to keep the wind going. So right now, we can't say too much about one way or the other.
Well, thank you for your question. I also, if you have any questions about the rivers at all, or water in particular, Kevin Lau is also on with the Missouri Basin River Forecast Center, and also Kevin Stamm with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Well, let's just see if Kevin Stamm, do you have anything you'd like to update as far as the Missouri or not?
No, I don't, Doug.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, we have about a minute maybe left here. Any other questions?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Do you know if other regions have similar webinars and presentations?
So, which particular region would you be most interested in?
Well, several, but West, California, Western.
Okay. I'm not aware of sort of regular ones like this. I know in the Southern Plains there are sort of ongoing webinars. They get recorded and put on YouTube. I don't know of those in California, but if you want us to check for you, double check for you, I should say, and certainly make your request known, we could help out with that if you would like.
We would be glad to help.
This is very good information, very insightful. So I congratulate you guys for being on the leading edge of communication.
Yeah, just send an email to I guess one of us. And tell us who you are, and you can tell us who you are now, and we'll let your needs be known.
Very good. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
You have a question?
No, I was just saying thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're most welcome. Well, thank you, Jim, for your presentation today, and thank you to all our panelists that were here, Dennis Toddy, and Doug Cluck, and Kevin Lau, and Kevin Stamm, and I'd like to thank all of you for being here with us today, and wish you all the best, and good day.
Thank you.